Hmm? Yeah. I mean, ideally sit, but if that's.
You want to.
Yeah, I mean, you can also use the presentation. Yes, you can also use the slides. We should also be here. Let me just make sure. Okay.
Okay, chill.
Here. All right. Should we start? And we are live. Anyway, everyone, thank you for coming so much. I have my friend Kenny, who's been a journalist investigating all the admission scandals. For those of you who do not know me, my name's Nick Tan. I work in finance. I'm on the deal desk team, looking at contracts all day. In my spare time, I interview very fascinating, interesting people. So thank you again for coming. Woo. All right. So I guess just a little bit quick background. I met Kenny a year ago through one of my social circles. We did an interview back then. I really got to know him and his friends and his cause. And I think now more than ever, Asian Americans are now visible, both culturally and politically, with the ascension of Angie Yang in politics, with Crazy Rich Asians in culture, that no longer can we kind of just like hide and fly under the radar that I think our immigrant parents may have wanted us to do, just get the job, don't rock the boat. So now we're becoming more and more visible. And so now I think we're at the state of we as Asian Americans should plant our flag and make our cause known. So that's what we're going to talk about. And I think, just to give a little bit of background on Yext, we're a good, fast-growing tech company. A lot of the people here are from backgrounds where excellence and high expectations were, if not encouraged, demanded. A lot of us went to very good schools. A few of us went to Ivy Leagues. And so how I see it is this is just, I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't have parents who had very high standards for me and pushed me in the direction of accomplishing everything I could be in this world. So with that, I guess Kenny, take it away. If you would like to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you. Sure. I mean, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here. It's an honor to be with a company whose product I have no idea what it's about. I even asked the product team what their product was about, and they said, "Good question." No, from what I understand, you guys do some like real advanced AI, like integrated with Google stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I became an author. I'm a writer, okay. Given enough time, I will try to understand you guys, I promise. But let's first talk about me. Great transition. I was a Davidson College math major, went to Davidson. I basically was a math major, and I was applying to all big firms, consulting, big tech, all that kind of thing. And then I just sort of stumbled upon this Asian American issue. For a while in high school and everything, I had like this sort of racial identity crisis, about like how much I really belonged in Asian culture, how much I really belonged as an American, everything like that. But I kind of put it aside because I was like, okay, I'm going to pursue my professional goals and everything like that. But then I found out about this case called the Harvard discrimination case. How many of you guys are familiar with the Harvard discrimination case or know about it? Know about it at all? Okay, just know about it. That's fine. And I'm here to educate you guys more about it and its implications for American culture, for the future, not only of Asian Americans, but for our culture of excellence in general. And I found out basically that Harvard, I didn't find out, but it became popularized that Harvard and other Ivy League universities were discriminating against Asian Americans to make room for other people. And by other people, what I mean is they wanted to make room for more minorities of other races, and I'm just going to be very frank with you guys. Minorities of other races, including blacks and Hispanics, legacy admits, children of donors, and basically other people who wouldn't otherwise get in on merit, okay? So here's how I know this. So the admissions data was released, and I became sort of the lead journalist on this data, uncovering this data. And the admissions data was released, and an Asian American has to score 440 points higher on the SAT to have the same chance of admission as a black person, about 300 points higher to have the same chance of admission as a Latino, 150 points higher to have the same chance of admission as a white person. And if for some reason, like this sort of evaded the radar until this group called Students for Fair Admissions sued Harvard University on the basis of discrimination. They say, hey, you can't discriminate against Asian Americans. And what Harvard's response was, well, we're doing it for diversity. That was their response. They say, we want a diverse student body. We want to be inclusive. Because we want to be diverse and inclusive, therefore, it justifies us discriminating against Asian Americans, all right? I'm just laying out the facts of the case, like, just right there. And, I'm gonna go through my thoughts on it. But this case, like, heavily interested me. And I sort of became a journalist on these issues. I started talking about it on radio. I investigated it. I got on the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal. I appeared on Fox News, CNN. And that's sort of like how I became the person I am today. And eventually, I landed a book contract to write my book, An Inconvenient Minority, which some of you are holding right now with my signature. Okay. So, yeah, this is sort of how I explained to you a little bit about my journalism career and how I began to write on this case. And then, so what happened was, it's funny, back in 2019, when this case like really took off, I was invited to speak at this this rally in Boston in support of Asian Americans, in support of the Asian Americans suing Harvard. And while I was there, I got in contact with this New York Times reporter who said he wanted to write this feature on the Asian Americans suing Harvard. So he brought me in and, kind of gave me a list of questions and everything like that. And sort of like, why are you interested in this case? He asked me like the standard affirmative action questions as well, like, what about the implications this would have for blacks? What about the implications this would have for like legacies? Don't you think that like Asian Americans are like, test prep and grade grub their way up to like, to get that result on the SAT? And, I just politely answered them, and I'm happy to answer all of those questions with you today. But basically, he did this spread on the New York Times Magazine. And it's funny, on that spread, on the cover photo, I'm actually there. I'm at the bottom, like my eyes, those are my eyes on the New York Times Magazine. So they didn't even show my entire face. It's very nice.
You have beautiful eyes, just for the record.
Thank you. They did show the most attractive part of myself, so. But then it's funny, so then they brought in this photographer and they came in to shoot photographs of me. And they shot about like 200 photographs of me, okay? So I was smiling, I was, happy, I was outside. And then the photograph that they decide to go with of me is a photograph of me looking lonely at a bar. And I think that was intentional. I think it was intentional. Because Asian Americans they were trying to portray the New York Times, and I read this guy's article too, so I'm not just saying this based on the picture. They were trying to portray Asian Americans as some sort of like low personality, sort of aggrieved people that were just sort of doing this because they didn't get into college and were kind of unhappy because they didn't get into college and they were rejected. And they said, oh, boo-hoo, you rejected Asian Americans, boo-hoo. And I was poster child of rejected Asian American in New York Times mind. So that really frustrated me because it reminded me of the first time that I pitched my book to my professor at Davidson College. I was a senior. I went to my political science professor, and I told her, hey, I have this really cool idea for this book. I want to write a book called An Inconvenient Minority. You know, it's about like how, yeah, like I get it, you know, people of color in America, but you know, there's this narrative about race that says if you're a person of color, you know, you belong in this category. But what are they going to do about the success of Asian Americans?
I apologize to just cut you off for a second. And I think this also will go to a theme later on when we do discuss like Asian hate crimes that I think stereotypes are, even the good stereotypes are actually bad, I think, long run, because I think everyone should be judged strictly individually on the personality, on who they are, their character. But yes, to your point, it does fall in the trap where, you know, certain groups, we all kind of get bundled into a certain stereotype, which is not true. The Asian American diaspora is very diverse. We have very different personalities, interests. So that's what I just want to say. But yes, go on.
Yes, and yeah, and I'll go even further, and I'll say that no matter what stereotypes you have about somebody, whether they're so-called good stereotypes or bad stereotypes, they're always bad. They're always bad. Okay, think about like the stereotype that black people are oppressed just because they're black. That is bad. That is a bad stereotype because there are some extraordinarily privileged people of all races in this country. And to say that someone, like at Harvard, for example, 71% of even the black applicants at Harvard come from wealthy backgrounds, okay? Like children of black lawyers and black doctors. So all stereotypes are bad.
I'll just move on to the case itself.
Yeah, let's move on to the case itself. So basically, yes. Let's talk about Asian Americans, and let's talk about why I decided to write this book, An Inconvenient Minority. So let's talk about the place of Asian Americans in society right now. So we're a minority. Right, we're about 6% of the population, and I want to kind of give you a picture about why Harvard feels this way about Asian Americans, like why they feel that Asian Americans are the minority that they could discriminate against for the sake of preserving the racial and legacy composition of their school. So Asian Americans generally don't come here with any money. Their parents, they generally don't have so-called privilege, whatever you want to call that, in the form of either social connections or generational wealth. The average wealth of the Asian immigrant coming to this country is $0 and 0 cents. They obviously don't come with any social connections, okay? So the only way that Asian Americans are going to succeed in this country is through their talent. Like, you have to understand that. Like, unlike other people who have lived here longer in this country, Asian Americans cannot succeed by relying on, like, cannot succeed by relying on family lineage.
Connections, your parents went to certain colleges, so your legacy, all that. Could we just move to the case itself? Sorry to keep moving this along.
Okay, sure. Okay, yeah. Don't worry, I'll get to the case.
Yes.
I'll get to the case. I just want you guys to know. I just want you guys to know that in terms of that. So that's why. So basically, if we start moving towards a society where those values, the values that reward talent, are abridged in some way, in any way, then that will result in Asians losing. Like, Asians will lose. So how does this play out in the Harvard case? How does this play out in the Harvard case? Okay, I'll tell you how this plays out in the Harvard case. So we like to think Harvard's admissions process is a meritocracy. It's not. It's not a meritocracy. You have preferences for many different groups. You have preferences for Black Americans. You have preferences for male Americans, actually, surprisingly. Potentially, that's actually not that surprising. Females generally are more educated than males in general in this country now. You have preferences for legacies, you have preferences for children of donors, and basically Harvard's system, and what Harvard would like to tell you is that admissions is a crapshoot. I'm sure people have explained to you when you applied to these prestigious colleges before, oh, it's a crapshoot. It's not a crapshoot. It's very intentional. And what happens with Asian Americans is that Harvard needs to maintain a certain ratio racially of their student body. They also need to maintain a certain ratio in terms of legacy, in terms of those kinds of things. So somebody has to get cut. So who's gonna get cut? Well, it turns out the people that get cut are Asian Americans. And in fact, the evidence of this is in the Harvard case itself, whereby Asian Americans are actually the group most likely to score high on academics. They're also the group that's most likely to score high on extracurriculars. So Asian Americans in general should actually be getting in at much higher rates than they normally do. But Harvard plays this very clever trick. They rate Asians lowest on their third score. They have 3 scores: academics, extracurricular, and personality. And they rate Asians lowest on the personality score, lower than all of the other races on average. So, and that is the score that is most used to get people into Harvard. And when I say Harvard, I mean all of the Ivy League colleges, because they're basically doing the same thing. And as a result, you see in this graph right here, Asian Americans basically flatten out at about 15 to 18% of the college. They basically, throughout the past 20 years, Asian Americans have been between 15 and 18% of the college. This is not an accident. This is for all 7 Ivy Leagues. And how do we know this is discrimination? Because I also manipulated the graph to include this, which is Caltech's admissions. Caltech is banned from using race in admissions because of an amendment that was made in 1994 called Proposition 209. They're banned from using race in admissions. And Caltech is also one of the most prestigious schools in America. Asians are like 40% of Caltech. And Harvard's own study that they released in 2013 said that if Asians were admitted on the basis of academics only, they would be 43% of Harvard. Instead, they're 18%. So that's a discrimination penalty of over 50%. And I will answer your questions about that, but I want to move on. We're going to skip that. So where is the Harvard discrimination case now? It has basically, so because of the data that I showed you and everything like that, the Harvard discrimination case is now litigated at the highest court of the land, at the Supreme Court of the United States. It has reached the Supreme Court of the United States. And this case is about more than just a few spots at Harvard. The reason why it got so much interest, Wall Street Journal covered it, New York Times covered it, my book became a bestseller. The reason why there's so much interest in this case, because everybody knows that this case is more than just about like 5 or 6 spots at Harvard or 10 spots at Harvard. Everybody knows that this case is really about how we want to treat treat achievement in this country. You know, basically, if a culture, any race can have any kind of cultural values, and this is why, you know, any race can have any kinds of cultural values that propel them to succeed. But if a culture in general adopts certain values that propel them to a certain level of success, what are you going to do about it? And in America, there have always been 2 options. And we as a country have not been perfect at choosing the best option. But there are 2 options moving forward. Either we can learn from it. We can say, wow, look at this culture of excellence in X field, whether it's Asians in academics, whether it was Jews in the business field in the 1940s, whether it was German immigrants in the mining fields, or whether it's even black entrepreneurs in the 1920s and 30s who helped build up the foundation of our country. Whenever you find a culture of excellence, you have 2 choices. Either we can learn from it and we can try to implement among ourselves, or we can adopt a policy of resentment. And we can try to attack their success, denigrate it, call them low personalities. Harvard has unfortunately chosen the second route. They have chosen a policy of resentment against Asians because they can't stand the thought of 40% of their class being Asian American. And this case will hopefully hold Harvard and all universities that do this accountable to the principle of what America should be about, which is the American dream, which is the dream of all immigrants who come to this country worldwide. If you come to this country, you're not guaranteed success. No one's guaranteed success. But if you come to this country, you should be treated on the basis of what you can contribute, not on the basis of your background. That's the principle we're fighting for. That's the principle that augurs my book, An Inconvenient Minority. And that's why I'm here with you today. Thank you. Whew.
All right. Again, thank you everyone for coming. I know these might be like sensitive things to talk about, but at the end of the day, I always promote like dialogue, discussion. And so Kenny's here for that, of course. But just a few things I wanted to bring up. So, everyone is different. Everyone can achieve by their own merit in whatever field, industry that they want. Some people are better in, the corporate life. Other people are better in sports, entertainment. That may be, just so long as everyone has the opportunity to achieve it. Kind of going back to the excellence in our schools. So I just put numbers up. So in 2020, we as Americans, we ranked 31st in math, 11th in science, and 9th in reading. So, and it wasn't too long ago, back in the 50s and 60s, our schools were actually the top and best in the world. But we have since then just, dramatically, went down ever since. I guess, do you have any comments on that? Is that the expectations have been lowered, the academic rigor has been lowered? And I do think this has implications for our national security and our economy as a whole.
Yeah, it does. Like, I'm a big believer in education. My parents basically, when they came here and they didn't have any money, they basically put their intergenerational bets on my education. So of course I'm a big believer in education. In terms of why America has declined, that's like the subject of another book. I could talk about it, but it's just way too complex. But I'll tell you this. I'll say this. I think we have a lot of belief in our public education system for good reason. But over the past 40 years, it hasn't really been working as well as we'd like, even though we spent 3 times as much money on public education, adjusted for inflation. So 3 times as much money per capita in public education over the past 40 years has produced stagnant results. We have the same math scores, the same reading scores as we did 40 years ago. So I think that is an issue. I think that that's an issue with the poor, that's an issue with all minority groups and everything like that. And I think that if we're going to solve this issue, we need to really investigate why that is happening, why we're spending all of this money and it's not working.
Okay. Just pivoting to the theme of today. So a lot of, unfortunately, with like the Asian hate crimes, with like Michelle Go being thrown on subway tracks, Christina Lee being followed into her apartment. Do you think, I think it's me, even with my background, I grew up in New Jersey. I was like the only Asian guy in my school, but I was always like aware that race was always like a factor for good and bad in our country. So now with the recent Asian hate crimes, just pulling up a stat, last year, 11% of respondents attributed Asian Americans as being at least partly responsible for the spread of COVID.
Sure.
Now this year, it's now 20%, which is kind of shocking. And this is asking specifically Asian Americans. So what does that say about our discourse? Is it that Asian Americans are now so visible in politics and media that we can't just like hide as we once did? And we need to speak up for ourselves?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, this goes back to, I think, cultures of excellence, right? Asians have historically been very good academically. I can attribute that basically straight up to study hours per week. Asians study on average 13 hours per week. The average American studies 7. So we study about double the number of hours per week. That's why we are academically successful. But Asians still have a lot to learn in American culture, particularly about speaking up. And I think, look, they have some reason to be wary of speaking up because, you lived in China between the 1960s and 70s or any kind of adjacent country, and you spoke up, and that was a reason to cut your head off. So, but in America, and this is true in America, it's always been true. If you don't speak up, no one's going to care about what you say. That's just the truth, That's why I always believe that Asian Americans do have to speak up. They have to speak up for their rights. They have to speak up their story. They have to talk about their concerns, because their concerns are every American's concerns. Every American wants good schools. Every American wants cultures of excellence. Every American wants to prioritize hard work. And in that sense, the more Asian Americans get involved with the political discourse, I think the better it will be for the country.
Cool, thank you. Let's go open up the Q&A. Does anyone have any questions, thoughts? Don't be shy. Yes.
Yeah, please.
Please.
Curious on
Yeah.
the third factor on the personality.
Please.
I had an issue with it. Obviously that sounds like a vague type factor that could be manipulated. Can you maybe talk about how Harvard and these other schools measure that? Is it just an interview, or what goes into that factor?
Yeah, I would love to. So that's a good question. So the personality score at Harvard measures what Harvard calls likability, getting along, leadership is another word that they use, humor, just generally being a classic example of a Harvard man is what they would call the personality score. Based on my analysis of the case, and not just mine, but also the lead economist fighting this case, Peter Sidiakono, our analysis has shown that I think that Harvard uses the personality score as a way to discriminate against Asian Americans. Because Asian Americans actually, if you actually look at the data behind the personality score, Asian Americans actually scored the highest on alumni interviews out of all the races. They also score the highest on teacher recommendations, and they score the second highest on counselor recommendations. So all of the things that you would like attribute to like a personality issue, if you could even do that, is negated by the fact that Asian Americans actually score highest on all of those factors too. And yet Asian Americans score lowest on the overall personality score, which is written by the admissions officer, the final admissions officer, who doesn't interview the candidate. So the alumni interview, who does actually interview the candidate, gives Asians the highest score, but then the final reviewer gives Asian Americans the lowest score.
Any, yes.
Yeah.
Case focused more on Ivy League schools, or is it kind of applicable across the kind of secondary education landscape?
The preferences are largest in Ivy League schools. There's a case to be made.
Sorry, to that point, I believe UNC Chapel was also the same issues with admissions.
Yeah.
UNC Chapel was just brought up, and the Supreme Court decided to just merge the two cases with Harvard and UNC. So now it's going to be heard at the Supreme Court next year on the courtroom floor.
Sure, yeah, no, that's true. Mm-hmm. That's true. So Harvard, Asian Americans are not just suing Harvard University, they're also suing the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, my home state, North Carolina. No, I did not lead that lawsuit, by the way. In case you guys want to know, that was not me. Yes, Harvard, UNC, they have similar preferences. UNC to a lesser extent, Harvard to a greater extent. And I think the reason why Harvard is to the greater extent was because they are like the cream of the crop. And so they're the college in which Asian Americans, are consistently flocking to and applying for. So they're also the ones that are adopting those discriminatory preferences. Yes.
Is there any indication of how the Supreme Court will rule, and any idea what the policies, like how they would change based on the ruling?
I think the Supreme Court will rule for the Asian Americans. The reason why is because they took up the case. They took up the case despite the fact that the lower two courts ruled for Harvard. I'll give you an explanation for why the lower two courts ruled for Harvard. So the lower two courts ruled for Harvard because the Supreme Court right now has a precedent called Grutter v. Bollinger. And in Grutter v. Bollinger, they assert that universities can use race in admissions for the sake of diversity. We can go into that if you want. I won't go too far into that. But basically, the lower courts are bound by that precedent. So you have to prove through that precedent that Asians are being not just discriminated against, but discriminated against insufficient enough to go past the Grutter v. Bollinger precedent. The Supreme Court is not constrained by the precedent because they're the Supreme Court. The current composition of justices right now signal that they will rule against Harvard and for Asian Americans, particularly the fact that I even think Chief Justice John Roberts will rule for the Asians because John Roberts has historically been opposed to the use of race in admissions. Even in 2005, that's what he said. So considering that he is a swing judge, supposedly, if he rules with the Asians, then the court will rule for the Asians. So I'm optimistic. Yeah, please.
Bill.
Thanks for your time, Kenny. This has
Thank
been
you.
very informative.
I appreciate it.
I just had one quick question regarding like a conflict of interest that may arise for any judge that may have attended Harvard Law School. Has that arisen? Like, has that happened?
I believe Judge Jackson actually just recused herself because she sits on the Harvard Board of Governors, I think yesterday or a few days ago.
Yeah, yes. Ketanji Brown Jackson, because she served in a overseeing role of Harvard, she was on the board of overseers during the time which Harvard was being sued for discrimination, she has recused herself.
Can we just go back, I think, one slide? We kind of glossed over it, but can you tell us about Color United?
Oh, yeah. So Colorist United I am an author. I'm also the president of Colorist United. And basically what we do is we're a project. We want to expand the ideas of a race-blind America. And what that means is we just want an America where we can get along and where we treat each other and we don't make assumptions about you based on your outward characteristics, right? We don't make assumptions on your status. We don't make assumptions on whether you need help or not. And if you want to tell your story to me, in a conversation, and we should be getting to know each other on that level, not on a facial, racial level. So unfortunately, I think that our policies in government right now, and to another extent, our culture is moving in a different direction. I think our culture is prioritizing race as a proxy to judge people, which I don't think is right for any reason, even if you're doing it because you want to help them. So I think the alternative, though, but when people say, okay, well, what are you fighting for then? Well, what I'm fighting for is I'm fighting for race-blind, meritocratic principles. I want to judge people on merit. I want to judge people on what they can contribute. That's not always easy, right? Like, you and I can have this debate forever about like how much we should weigh test scores, how much we should weigh GPA, how much we should weigh the personal essay. But I think we can all agree that race has no impact on your merit, on your actual talent. So that's what we do at Colorist United. We fight for the ideals of a race-blind America.
Does someone else have questions? I know. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Kevin.
Hey, Kenny, I wanted to hear your thoughts about, I guess, like this whole lawsuit, even in this screenshot, we just see the Wall Street Journal article. It seems to say like all of this is like conservative-led, right? Like if you read the caption over there, it's like justice will weigh conservative-led legal challenges. Why do you think this issue is like conservative to, I guess, media outlets, to people who are like looking at this topic? Shouldn't it just be like,
Maybe a better question is like maybe a better way to phrase this, why is it politicized?
yeah, why is it politicized?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. The way that hopefully the way that I pitched it to you guys today, you guys don't make the assumption that this is just like a conservative right-wing thing. Hopefully that my argument was convincing in that sense. But I'll tell you why like this has been portrayed this way, and then I'll tell you why I think it's wrong. I think it's portrayed as a conservative lawsuit because historically conservatives have been opposed to racial preferences. And maybe like 50 years ago, I think that would be, maybe 50 years ago, I think that would be more appropriate, because 50 years ago, the argument for racial preferences, especially for Black Americans, is stronger than it is now. Because 50 years ago, Black Americans actually just emerged out of non-discriminatory civil rights legislation. But after a period of 2-3 generations, that argument grows weaker and weaker over time. And the argument, and the other side of the flip side of the argument, which is that racial preferences is now disadvantaging groups that do not deserve to be disadvantaged, is growing stronger and stronger over time. So, and I think that's also reflected in the polling, actually. There is a case in California, which is not really a conservative state. In California, a measure called Proposition 16 was voted against. Proposition 16 would have reinstituted race preferences. Remember, it was banned in 1994. It would have been reinstituted in California at these UC universities, UC Berkeley, everything like that. That was voted against by 57% of the California electorate, including majorities of Asians, white people, and Latinos, and like 49% of Black Americans. So I don't think it's a conservative issue anymore.
Does anyone on the Zoom have questions? Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, please.
Hi, it's Nicole. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I just had a question more about like college admissions in general. Just, you know, with the scandal with all the celebrities and things like that. You know, what do you think, like, I guess in your opinion, can fix all of this? Because it seems to be multiple issues going on at the same time.
Fix all of this. I
What
guess
do you think, I guess, is like the biggest issues to fix? And in your opinion, how do you think you can fix them? Or they could be fixed?
the biggest issues to fix. World peace. No, just kidding.
And
Well,
we're all-
specifically on college admissions.
No, specifically regards to college admissions, I think we should make college admissions more meritocratic. That I think is the best fix. And I think it's better for everybody. I think it's better for, yes, I think it's better for everybody. New studies show that even when like Black Americans get into universities, in part due to racial preferences, they're more likely to graduate at the bottom 25% of their school. They face a whole host of other issues. They also, unfortunately, because of they tend to self-segregate because people tend to segregate into groups based on skill level. And so, if you're admitting people who are not at that skill level, there becomes a mismatch effect. So I actually think it's better to admit people just on the basis of merit as to wherever they go, because guess what? Like our second tier universities and third tier universities are still very good universities. Like they're gonna educate you really well, and they're gonna educate you at a place where you're competitive at. So I think that's what it should. We need to have very meritocratic admissions standards. That's my firm belief. And I think it's better for every population. I was going somewhere with that as well. Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I just want to stress that, we just want to create a environment where everyone can achieve their true potential. Look, I probably wouldn't be here right now talking to all of you, and I kind of understand that, this is a very privileged room. Like we all came from, economically stable families who went to good schools, but I think the idea here is to leave behind for the same opportunities, if not a bigger pie of opportunities for our children and for our neighbors, our communities, so they can have the same opportunities as well to achieve and become everything they want to be.
And the other thing I wanted to stress is the robustness of our education system. As in we should have a little more faith in our higher education system, in the sense that Harvard's logic is operating out of a principle of scarcity, saying if you don't get into our university, life is going to be objectively worse for you. And the evidence of that doesn't actually show to an effect. In fact, even if we're just thinking in terms of salary, your major choice is much more important than the prestige of the university you get into. That's just a fact. But let's say somebody falls through the cracks. Let's say we had a really talented student, a minority individual who didn't get into Harvard, but should have gotten into Harvard, and did 2 years at Swarthmore or UC Berkeley or something like that instead, and said, wow, I'm really qualified for Harvard. Well, you should have there's a great transfer process where you can actually transfer, into that school. So I think that we do have a robust educational system here, and I do think things are going to work itself out. And I don't think that there is much of an excuse for actually discriminating on the basis of race. Yeah, please.
Do you think that there would be kind of a disconnect if the higher education system, which kind of you can think of it in a vacuum, if that is purely operating on the basis of meritocracy, but the reality is that the rest of American society is not based on pure meritocracy. So like if people leading up to the point of applying to higher education are not coming through this process of meritocratic like education, I feel like there's still like a challenge of just fixing this one problem, but there are so many other issues in society that kind of fall in the same category. But do you think solving this one problem would ultimately help to solve a lot of these other problems?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it would. And here's why. Because higher education is the place where young people develop their ideals. It's where they refine their political views. It's also where they create the future of the next society. So if there is a place to do it, if there is a place to set an ideal, it should be in higher education. And reminder that the problems with higher education go further than just race and admissions, although that is a problem. It also goes into legacy status and the way that the admissions process has been manipulated by people with privileged connections. There is a certain percentage of Phillips Exeter Academy applicants that Harvard accepts every year, no matter what. And another statistic that I have is 33% of Harvard admits are legacy, 10% are children of donors. By the way, when I say children of donor, I don't mean like, oh, I donated $1,000 to Harvard, I'm a donor. No, I mean like 50 million and above, you know? And basically what happens is that if you donate to Harvard and you donate 50 million and above, you get your kid, and this is not confirmed, but this is the most likely suspicion that you get from the documents of the case. You get put on this, your kid gets put on this thing called a dean's list, where Dean Fitzsimmons will basically take you out of the standard applicant pool and evaluate you himself. I wonder why, you know? And this dean's list has a 45% acceptance rate. Then the average Harvard acceptance rate is 6%. So in a way, the higher education system is a synecdoche for our larger society, in the sense that it comes with all of the problems that our larger society has right now. But it's also the place where things are closest to being potentially fixed or mitigated.
And to that point, I'm blanking on their names, but they're the two like TikTok or YouTube personalities. I don't know what to call them. Yeah. And I think it was like in UCLA, Varsity Blues, that their parents donated a tremendous amount of money to the school, and they just invented like a row team to like, oh yeah, you're rowers, even though they never rowed a day in your life, just to get their kids into school. I'm blanking on their names, but they're two like TikTok celebrities. So
right.
Cool. I think we're almost out of. Oh yeah, we are out of time. Just kidding. Cool. So.
Does anybody have one more question?
Oh, yes. One more question. Quick one. Anyone on Zoom?
Yeah, please.
Thanks.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. You know, clearly you don't agree with race being a reason for admissions. Do you think, and I hear you on the meritocracy argument, do you think there's an argument for like economic background where, you know, people who are poor probably have less access to education, harder to build up the skills to have that merit to get in? Do you think there should be, I don't know, some sort of a system related to your economic means where race isn't clearly, you don't believe is a good basis for that? But what about your economic background?
I think there's a better case for socioeconomic status, but I still don't think it trumps the discrimination argument. And the reason why is, well, I like socioeconomic status better than race. Don't get me wrong, because like there's a lot of poor whites and poor Asians in this country. In fact, poor Asians in this city. The highest poverty rate in New York City is among Asian Americans. People don't realize that. It's higher than blacks and it's higher than Latinos. Highest poverty rate is actually Asian Americans. But the highest math and science scores is in New York City is also Asian Americans. So that's crazy. I mean, it's actually not crazy if you think about it. It's because Asian Americans study, again, twice as many hours as the average American. And they, in general, cultivate those values that allow that. So that's my argument on that. So yeah, I think the argument for socioeconomic preferences is better, but I don't think that it's the best argument still, because every time you admit somebody, basically when you're saying any kind of preference, what are you saying? You're saying, I'm going to admit person X instead of person Y, even though person Y has objectively better qualifications than person X. That's what you're saying. That's what a preference is. So if you say, I'm going to admit person X who has lower credentials than person Y, well, person Y, studied really hard, worked pretty hard to get objectively the high qualifications that he get, and he should have a shot, And the other argument is the mismatch argument, which is, well, is person X going to be as successful in this institution as person Y? And, there's a stronger argument, in my view, that person Y would be more successful and person X would still be most successful at a university in which person X is best suited and qualified for.
Cool. Well, everyone, thank you so much for coming. I hope you found this discussion thoroughly interesting. There should be food and alcohol outside. Many thanks to Trang. Kenny, thank you again for coming.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. He'll be sticking around, so if you want to ask him more questions, by all means. So
Yep,
please,
absolutely.
open discussion as always. Cool. And yeah, just to cap it all off, I just want everyone to live their best lives and achieve everything they can in this world. So thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Wait, where's Trang? Oh, Trang's outside. I was like,